The kitchen was quiet except for the soft sobs of Jasmine, Mike Thompson's young daughter. Mike stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as he listened to Jasmine's trembling voice describe the inappropriate comments made by her school bus driver. The fluorescent light overhead cast harsh shadows, emphasizing the tears rolling down Jasmine's cheeks. He said I looked pretty today, Jasmine managed between hiccups. But the way he looked at me, Dad, it wasn't right. It made me feel scared. Mike felt a surge of emotions, anger, fear, and a fierce protectiveness that threatened to overwhelm him. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. What else did he say, sweetheart? Jasmine hesitated, her small frame shaking slightly. He asked if I had a boyfriend, and then he winked at me. He said I was becoming a beautiful young woman. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't like it, Dad. I don't want to ride the bus anymore. Mike's jaw clenched, his mind racing with scenarios of confronting the driver. He forced himself to remain calm for Jasmine's sake. You did the right thing by telling me, Jasmine. I'm so proud of you for speaking up. He moved closer to his daughter, kneeling down to her level. Listen to me, Jasmine. What that driver did was wrong. It's not your fault, and you didn't do anything to encourage it. I promise you, I'm going to take care of this. Jasmine looked up at her father, her eyes wide and uncertain. What are you going to do? Mike placed his hands gently on Jasmine's shoulders. First, I'm going to call the police. What the driver did is against the law, and they need to know about it. Then we're going to make sure he never drives a school bus again. He paused, making sure Jasmine was following his words. But I need you to be brave for me, okay? The police might want to ask you some questions. Can you tell them exactly what you told me? Jasmine hesitated, fear flickering across her face. Will the driver get mad at me? Mike shook his head firmly. No, sweetheart. He won't be able to hurt you or anyone else once we report him. You're doing the right thing by speaking up. You're protecting yourself and other kids who might be in danger. Jasmine nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Okay, Dad. I'll try to be brave. Mike pulled his daughter into a tight hug, feeling her small body relax slightly against him. That's my girl. I'm so proud of you, Jasmine. We're going to get through this together. After a few moments, Mike gently pulled away. Why don't you go up to your room and rest for a bit? I'm going to make some phone calls. As Jasmine trudged up the stairs, Mike pulled out his cell phone. His hand shook slightly as he dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice came through, calm and professional. 911? What's your emergency? Mike took a deep breath. I need to report a case of child harassment. It's about a school bus driver who's been making inappropriate comments to my daughter. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. Can you provide more details, sir? Mike relayed Jasmine's account, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. He provided the name of the school, the bus route number, and as much information as he could about the driver. An officer will be dispatched to your location shortly, the dispatcher assured him. In the meantime, please don't discuss the details of the incident with your daughter any further. The officer will need to hear her account firsthand. Mike agreed, ending the call. He paced the kitchen, his mind whirling with questions and concerns. How long had this been going on? Were other children affected? How had the school missed this? He glanced at the clock, willing it to move faster. Each minute felt like an hour as he waited for the police to arrive. He thought about calling the school but decided against it. The police should be the first to handle this. Finally, a knock at the door broke the tense silence. Mike rushed to answer it. Finding two officers on his porch, he invited them in, leading them to the living room. Mr. Thompson? One of the officers asked. Mike nodded. I'm Officer Davis, and this is Officer Chen. We understand you have a report to make about a school bus driver. Mike nodded again, his throat tight. Yes, it's about my daughter, Jasmine. She told me the driver has been making inappropriate comments to her. Officer Chen took out a notepad. "Can you tell us exactly what Jasmine reported to you?" Mike recounted Jasmine's story, watching as the officers exchanged glances. When he finished, Officer Davis spoke. "We'll need to speak with Jasmine directly. Is she available?" Mike hesitated, protective instincts flaring. "She's upstairs. She's pretty shaken up. Can I be with her when you talk to her?" Officer Chen nodded. "Of course. We'll keep the questioning as brief and gentle as possible." Mike called Jasmine down, his heart aching as he saw the fear in her eyes when she spotted the police officers. He sat beside her on the couch, holding her hand as she bravely recounted her experience to the officers. As Jasmine spoke, Mike felt a mix of pride in his daughter's courage and renewed anger at the driver who had caused this distress. He squeezed Jasmine's hand reassuringly, silently promising to see this through to the end. When the officers finished their questions, Officer Davis turned to Mike. "We'll be contacting the school immediately to initiate an investigation. The driver will be questioned, and appropriate action will be taken based on our findings." Mike nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. "What happens next?" "We'll keep you informed of any developments," Officer Chen assured him. "In the meantime, if Jasmine remembers anything else or if there are any further incidents, please contact us immediately." As the officers prepared to leave, Mike walked them to the door. "Thank you for your quick response," he said, his voice low. "Please, do whatever it takes to keep our children safe." The officers nodded solemnly before departing. Mike closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The initial steps had been taken, but he knew this was just the beginning. He returned to the living room, where Jasmine sat quietly. "You did great, sweetheart," he said, sitting beside her. "I know that wasn't easy, but you've done something really important today." Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes still worried. "What's going to happen now, Dad?" Mike put his arm around her shoulders. "The police are going to talk to the driver and the school. They're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else, and we're going to make sure you and all the other kids are safe on the bus from now on." As he comforted his daughter, Mike's mind was already racing ahead. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He was determined to see this through, to ensure not just Jasmine's safety, but the safety of all the children in their community. Whatever it took, he would make sure no child had to feel afraid on their way to school again. The next morning, Mike drove Jasmine to school, the atmosphere in the car tense with anticipation. As they pulled into the school parking lot, Mike spotted 2 police cruisers near the main entrance. He gave Jasmine's hand a reassuring squeeze before they exited the vehicle. Officer Davis approached them, her face professional but kind. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson, Jasmine. We'd like to ask Jasmine a few more questions, if that's all right. We have a child advocacy specialist here to help." Mike knelt down to Jasmine's level. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? Just tell the truth, okay? I'll be right outside if you need me." Jasmine nodded, her eyes wide but determined. She followed Officer Davis into the school, leaving Mike to wait anxiously outside the principal's office. Inside a small conference room, Jasmine sat across from a gentle-faced woman who introduced herself as Ms. Patel, the child advocacy specialist. Officer Chen sat nearby, ready to take notes. "Jasmine," Ms. Patel began softly, "can you tell us a bit more about what happened on the bus? Take your time and remember, you're not in any trouble." Jasmine took a deep breath, her father's encouragement echoing in her mind. "It started a few weeks ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Johnson, the bus driver, he started saying things, nice things at first, but then—" She faltered, twisting the hem of her shirt in her fingers. Ms. Patel nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, Jasmine. You're doing great." "He started looking at me funny," Jasmine continued. "He'd wink at me when I got on the bus, and yesterday he told me I was becoming a beautiful young woman. He asked if I had a boyfriend." Tears welled up in her eyes. It made me feel yucky inside. Officer Chen jotted down notes, his expression neutral, but his eyes compassionate. Ms. Patel gently asked a few more questions, careful not to lead Jasmine, but allowing her to share her experience in her own words. Outside, Mike paced the hallway, checking his watch every few minutes. The school principal, Mrs. Hernandez, approached him, her face etched with concern. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. We've contacted the bus company and Mr. Johnson has been called in for questioning." Mike nodded, his jaw clenched. "And what about the other children? Has anyone else reported anything?" Mrs. Hernandez sighed. "We're in the process of reaching out to other parents. So far, no one else has come forward, but it's early yet." Their conversation was interrupted as Jasmine emerged from the conference room, her eyes red-rimmed but her posture straighter. Mike immediately went to her, pulling her into a hug. "You did great, sweetheart," he murmured. "I'm so proud of you." Officer Davis approached them. "Mr. Thompson, we've contacted the bus company. Mr. Johnson should be arriving shortly. We'd like you to stay if possible." Mike nodded, his expression hardening. "I'm not going anywhere." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. More parents arrived, having been contacted by the school. The atmosphere grew tense as rumors spread and concern mounted. Finally, a police car pulled up, and 2 officers escorted a man into the building. Mike recognized him immediately as Robert Johnson, the bus driver. Johnson looked calm, almost cocky, as he was led into the principal's office. Mike felt a surge of anger, his fists clenching at his sides. He wanted nothing more than to confront Johnson directly, to demand answers, to protect his daughter and all the other children. But he knew he had to let the police handle this. Inside the office, Detective Sarah Martinez took charge of the questioning. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice cool and professional, "we've received some serious allegations about your conduct with the children on your bus route. Do you understand why you're here?" Johnson leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk on his face. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm great with the kids. They love me." Detective Martinez's eyes narrowed. "We have a statement from one of your passengers, Mr. Johnson, a young girl who says you've been making inappropriate comments to her. Care to explain that?" Johnson's smirk faltered for a moment before returning. "Kids say all sorts of things. You know how they are, always making up stories for attention." Outside, Mike overheard snippets of the conversation through the partially open door. His blood boiled at Johnson's dismissive attitude. He started towards the office, but Officer Chen intercepted him. "I know this is difficult, Mr. Thompson," Chen said quietly, "but we need to handle this by the book. We don't want to give him any grounds for dismissal of charges." Mike took a deep breath, forcing himself to step back. He noticed Jasmine watching him from across the hallway, her eyes wide with concern. He gave her a reassuring smile, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. Back in the office, Detective Martinez pressed on. "Mr. Johnson, we take these allegations very seriously. We'll be interviewing other children on your route and reviewing any available camera footage from your bus. Is there anything you'd like to tell us now?" Johnson's confidence seemed to waver. "Look, I'm just friendly with the kids. Maybe something I said was misinterpreted. I never meant any harm." "Misinterpreted." Detective Martinez's voice was sharp. "Asking a young girl if she has a boyfriend is not something that's easily misinterpreted, Mr. Johnson." Johnson's face paled. He opened his mouth to respond, but Detective Martinez cut him off. "I think we've heard enough for now. Mr. Johnson, you're going to need to come with us to the station for further questioning." As Johnson was led out of the office in handcuffs, Mike felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Relief that action was being taken, anger at Johnson's attitude, and a gnawing worry about what might have happened if Jasmine hadn't spoken up. Parents in the hallway whispered and pointed as Johnson was escorted out. Some looked shocked, others angry. Mike caught Johnson's eye as he passed, and for a moment he saw a flicker of fear in the man's expression. Mrs. Hernandez addressed the gathered parents, her voice strained but determined. "I know you all have questions and concerns. We'll be holding an emergency meeting this evening to discuss the situation and our plans moving forward. In the meantime, please talk to your children. If they have any information or concerns, we need to know." As the crowd began to disperse, Mike felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to see Jasmine, her face a mix of worry and relief. "Is it over, Dad?" she asked quietly. Mike knelt down, meeting her eyes. "Not quite, sweetheart. But you've done something really brave and important. Because of you, other kids are going to be safer." Jasmine nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I'm glad I told you." Mike pulled her into a hug, his heart swelling with pride and love. "Me too, Jasmine. Me too." As they walked out of the school, Mike knew this was just the beginning. There would be more questions, more investigations, maybe even a trial. But looking at his daughter, seeing her newfound strength, he knew they would face whatever came next together. The arrest of Robert Johnson was a significant step, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. As he drove Jasmine home, his mind raced with questions. How long had this really been going on? Were there other victims who hadn't come forward? And most importantly, how could they ensure this never happened again? Mike glanced at Jasmine in the rearview mirror, her face pensive but no longer afraid. He made a silent promise to her and to himself. He would see this through no matter what it took. The safety of their children was worth fighting for, and this was a fight he was determined to win. The news of Robert Johnson's arrest spread through the community like wildfire. Within hours of the incident at the school, Mike's phone began ringing incessantly. Parents, neighbors, and even local reporters were eager for information. As Mike walked into the local grocery store the next day, he was immediately approached by Sarah Goldstein, whose daughter rode the same bus as Jasmine. "Mike," Sarah said, her voice hushed but urgent. "Is it true? About the bus driver?" Mike nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so, Sarah. Jasmine came forward about some inappropriate comments he made." Sarah's face paled. "Oh, God! Lily! She mentioned feeling uncomfortable around him, but I thought she was just being shy. I should have listened more carefully." This interaction repeated itself throughout the day. Parents approached Mike in the store, at the gas station, and even as he mowed his lawn. Each conversation revealed a similar pattern. Children who had expressed discomfort, parents who had dismissed it as normal childhood anxiety. By the time evening rolled around, Mike felt emotionally drained. He sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through dozens of messages on his phone when Jasmine entered the room. "Dad?" she asked hesitantly. "Are you okay?" Mike looked up, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about everything that's happened." Jasmine sat down across from him. "I heard you talking to Mrs. Goldstein earlier. Did other kids have problems with Mr. Johnson too?" Mike paused, considering how much to share. "It seems like some other children might have felt uncomfortable too, yes, but you were the first one brave enough to speak up about it." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Really? But why didn't they say anything?" "Sometimes it's hard to speak up when something doesn't feel right," Mike explained gently, "especially when it's an adult making you uncomfortable. That's why what you did was so important." Jasmine sat quietly for a moment, processing this information. "Do you think maybe I could help other kids learn to speak up too?" Mike felt a surge of pride at his daughter's words. "That's a wonderful idea, Jasmine. We'll definitely think about how you can do that." The next evening, Mike found himself in the school auditorium, surrounded by concerned parents. The emergency meeting called by Principal Hernandez was packed, with people standing along the walls. As the principal took the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," Mrs. Hernandez began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I know you all have many questions and concerns about the recent arrest of Mr. Johnson. I want to assure you that we are taking this situation very seriously." She outlined the steps the school was taking: counseling services for students, a review of hiring practices and increased security measures on buses. But as she opened the floor for questions, it became clear that many parents felt these measures weren't enough. "How did this slip through the cracks?" one father demanded. "Weren't background checks done?" "What about the other drivers?" a mother called out. "How can we trust any of them now?" The meeting grew heated, with parents talking over each other, voices rising in anger and fear. Mike watched, feeling a mix of understanding and frustration. These were valid concerns, but the chaos wasn't helping anyone. Finally, unable to stay silent any longer, Mike stood up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. The room gradually quieted as people turned to look at him. "I know we're all scared and angry," Mike began. "I am too. My daughter, Jasmine, was the one who first reported Mr. Johnson's behavior." A murmur ran through the crowd at this revelation. "But pointing fingers and yelling isn't going to solve anything," Mike continued. "What we need is action. We need to teach our kids how to recognize and report inappropriate behavior. We need better communication between parents, students, and the school. And most importantly, we need to work together to create a safer environment for all our children." As Mike spoke, he saw heads nodding in agreement. The atmosphere in the room shifted from angry chaos to determined focus. "Mr. Thompson is right," Mrs. Hernandez said, seizing the moment. "We need your help to make these changes. I'd like to propose forming a parent-teacher safety committee to address these issues." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and by the end of the meeting, a core group of parents, including Mike, had volunteered to be part of the committee. As people filed out of the auditorium, several parents approached Mike to thank him for speaking up. Among them was Lisa Chen, whose son was in Jasmine's class. "Mike," Lisa said, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "I can't thank you and Jasmine enough. My Kevin, he told me tonight that Mr. Johnson had made him uncomfortable too. If Jasmine hadn't come forward..." Mike placed a comforting hand on Lisa's shoulder. "I'm just glad it's out in the open now. We'll make sure nothing like this happens again." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Mike found himself juggling his regular work with meetings for the newly formed safety committee. But it was Jasmine who truly surprised him. One afternoon, he arrived at school to pick her up and found her surrounded by a group of her classmates. As he approached, he could hear her speaking. "And that's why it's so important to tell a grown-up if someone makes you feel weird or scared," Jasmine was saying. "Even if it's another adult, especially if it's another adult." Mike watched in amazement as the other children listened intently, asking questions and sharing their own experiences. His little girl, who had been so frightened just days ago, was now leading her peers with confidence. As the group dispersed and Jasmine spotted him, she ran over with a bright smile. "Dad, I was just telling everyone about what happened and why it's important to speak up." "I saw," Mike said, his voice filled with pride. "That was really amazing, Jasmine. How did this start?" Jasmine shrugged. "Some kids were asking me questions about Mr. Johnson, and I realized they didn't really understand what had happened, so I decided to explain it to them." Mike knelt down to her level. "You know, sweetheart, what you're doing is really important. You're not just helping yourself, you're helping all these other kids too." Jasmine's eyes lit up. "Really? Do you think maybe I could talk to more kids about this? Like, officially?" Mike nodded, an idea forming. "I think that's a great idea. Let me talk to Mrs. Hernandez and the safety committee. We might be able to set something up." Over the next week, with the support of the school and the safety committee, Jasmine began speaking to small groups of students about recognizing and reporting inappropriate behavior. Her simple, direct approach resonated with her peers in a way that adult lectures never could. As Mike watched his daughter grow into this new role, he felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in her courage and compassion, sadness that she had to learn these lessons so young, and a renewed determination to fight for the safety of all children in their community. The arrest of Robert Johnson had been just the beginning. Now, thanks to Jasmine's bravery and the community's response, Real change was happening. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But as Mike looked at Jasmine, confidently addressing a group of her peers, he knew they were on the right path. The road ahead might be difficult, but they would face it together, as a family and as a community, united in their commitment to protecting their children. 2 weeks after Robert Johnson's arrest, Mike and Jasmine found themselves back at the school, this time for a specially organized meeting to discuss bus safety. The atmosphere was different from the previous emergency meeting, less panicked, more focused. Parents, teachers, and even some older students filled the school gymnasium, all united by a common purpose. Mike and Jasmine arrived early, setting up a small table near the entrance with information packets they had prepared. Jasmine, wearing a handmade button that read, "Speak up, stay safe," greeted people as they entered, handing out the packets with a confidence that made Mike's heart swell with pride. Principal Hernandez approached them, a tired but genuine smile on her face. "Mike, Jasmine, thank you both for being here and for all your hard work. We couldn't have organized this without you." Mike nodded, returning the smile. "We're just glad to help, Mrs. Hernandez. Has there been any update on the investigation?" The principal's smile faltered slightly. "That's part of what we'll be discussing today, but I think you'll be pleased with some of the changes we're proposing." As the meeting began, Mrs. Hernandez took center stage. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to discuss the safety of our children, particularly on school buses. But before we get into our proposed changes, I'd like to invite Jasmine Thompson to say a few words." A hush fell over the crowd as Jasmine made her way to the front. Mike gave her an encouraging nod, marveling at how much she had grown in just a few short weeks. Jasmine took a deep breath before speaking, her voice clear and steady. "Hi everyone, I'm Jasmine." Children and teenagers listened intently, many nodding in agreement. "We need to look out for each other," Jasmine concluded. "And we need the grown-ups to listen and believe us when we say something's wrong. Thank you." The gymnasium erupted in applause as Jasmine returned to her seat. Mike squeezed her hand, whispering, "You did great, sweetheart." Mrs. Hernandez retook the stage, building on the momentum Jasmine had created. "Thank you, Jasmine, for your bravery and your powerful words. Now let's discuss the changes we're proposing to ensure the safety of all our students." Over the next hour, Mrs. Hernandez outlined a comprehensive plan. It included installing cameras on all school buses, implementing a rigorous background check system for all school employees and volunteers, and creating a confidential reporting system for students to voice their concerns. But perhaps most importantly, Mrs. Hernandez said, "We're proposing mandatory safety training for all bus drivers, teachers, and staff. This training will cover appropriate behavior, recognizing signs of abuse, and how to respond to student concerns." As Mrs. Hernandez opened the floor for questions and comments, Mike raised his hand. "These all sound like great initiatives," he began. "But I have to ask, why weren't these measures in place before? And how can we ensure they're properly implemented and maintained?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Hernandez nodded, acknowledging the validity of the question. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Thompson. We should have had better safeguards in place. That's why we're also proposing the formation of a permanent safety oversight committee comprised of parents, teachers, and administrators to ensure these measures are implemented and regularly reviewed." The discussion continued, with parents and teachers alike offering suggestions and voicing concerns. As the meeting progressed, Mike could feel a sense of purpose and unity growing in the room. People who had been angry and scared were now engaged and determined to make a difference. As the meeting drew to a close, Mike stood up once more. "I think we all agree that these proposed changes are a step in the right direction," he said. "But I'd like to suggest one more thing. I think we should start a petition to present to the school board and the bus company, showing our united support for these new safety measures. The more signatures we can get, the more weight our demands will carry." The idea was met with enthusiastic approval. Mrs. Hernandez quickly agreed, promising to have the petition drafted and ready for signatures by the next day. As people began to file out of the gymnasium, many stopped to talk to Mike and Jasmine, offering words of support and volunteering to help with the petition drive. Mike felt a renewed sense of hope. They were making progress. Over the next few days, the petition drive gained momentum. Mike and Jasmine spent their evenings and weekends setting up tables at local supermarkets, community centers, and even youth sports events. Jasmine, in particular, threw herself into the effort, her passion inspiring others to get involved. One evening, as they were packing up after a long day of collecting signatures, Jasmine turned to Mike with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," she said, "do you think we could do something to help kids at other schools too? It's not just our school that needs to be safer, right?" Mike paused, considering her words. "You're absolutely right, Jasmine. This is bigger than just our school. What did you have in mind?" Jasmine's eyes lit up. "Well, what if we made a video? We could share our story and talk about what we're doing to make things safer. Maybe it could help other schools start their own safety programs." Mike felt a surge of pride at his daughter's compassion and initiative. "That's a brilliant idea, sweetheart. Let's talk to Mrs. Hernandez about it tomorrow." The next day, they presented the idea to the principal, who enthusiastically agreed. With the help of the school's media department, they began working on a short video detailing their community's response to the incident and the changes they were implementing. As the petition drive continued and work on the video progressed, Mike couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. What had started as a personal nightmare had transformed into a community-wide movement for change. He watched as Jasmine confidently explained their safety initiatives to a local reporter, her voice strong and clear. However, amid the progress and positivity, a nagging worry persisted in the back of Mike's mind. The investigation into Robert Johnson was still ongoing, and there were whispers of a broader problem within the school district. He couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over. One evening, as Mike was reviewing the latest signature count for the petition, he received a call from Lisa Chen, one of the parents on the Safety Oversight Committee. "Mike," Lisa's voice was tense, "I've been doing some digging into the bus company's hiring practices. There's something you need to see. Can you meet me tomorrow?" Mike agreed, a sense of unease settling in his stomach. As he hung up the phone, he looked over at Jasmine, who was working on her homework at the kitchen table. She had already been through so much, shown such incredible strength. He hated the thought of there being more challenges ahead. But as he watched his daughter, head bent in concentration, that familiar determination rose within him. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. They had started this fight for Jasmine's safety, but it had become about so much more. It was about protecting all children, about creating a community where kids could feel safe and trusted. As he joined Jasmine at the table, helping her with a particularly tricky math problem, Mike silently renewed his commitment. They had come too far to back down now. Whatever Lisa had discovered, whatever obstacles lay ahead, they would overcome them. For Jasmine, for their community, and for every child who deserved to feel safe and protected. The school auditorium buzzed with excitement as students, parents, and community members filed in for the annual safety awareness event. This year's gathering held special significance, given the recent events involving Robert Johnson. At the center of it all was Jasmine, nervously adjusting her note cards backstage. Mike stood nearby, offering words of encouragement. "You've got this, sweetheart. Just speak from your heart, like we practiced." Jasmine nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know, Dad. I just want to make sure I say everything right. It's important." As the principal introduced Jasmine, Mike gave her a final thumbs up before she stepped onto the stage. The auditorium fell silent as Jasmine approached the microphone, her small frame barely visible behind the podium. "Hi, everyone," Jasmine began, her voice slightly shaky but growing stronger with each word. "My name is Jasmine Thompson, and I'm here to talk to you about something really important. staying safe and speaking up when something doesn't feel right. As Jasmine shared her story, weaving in the lessons she'd learned and the importance of communication between children and adults, Mike watched the audience's reaction. Parents leaned forward, hanging on every word. Children and teenagers nodded in recognition, some wiping away tears. "It's not always easy to speak up," Jasmine continued, her voice clear and confident now. "Sometimes we're scared, or we think no one will believe us. But it's so important, because when we speak up, we're not just protecting ourselves, we're protecting each other." She went on to outline the new safety measures the school had implemented, emphasizing the role everyone played in creating a safe environment. As she concluded her speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. Mike felt a lump in his throat as he watched his daughter receive a standing ovation. After the event, people crowded around Jasmine, offering praise and thanks. Several children approached her, sharing their own experiences and asking for advice. Mike overheard one young boy say, "I was scared to tell anyone about the older kids bullying me on the bus, but after hearing you, I'm going to talk to my parents tonight." As they drove home that evening, Mike couldn't stop smiling. "You were amazing up there, Jasmine. You should be so proud of yourself." Jasmine beamed, then grew thoughtful. "Dad, do you think I made a difference, like really helped someone?" Mike nodded emphatically. "Absolutely, sweetheart. I heard kids talking about speaking up because of you. You're changing lives, Jasmine. Never doubt that." The next few weeks saw a flurry of activity. Jasmine was invited to speak at other schools in the district, sharing her story and the importance of safety awareness. The video they had created went viral, attracting attention from local and even national media. Mike found himself juggling interview requests and speaking engagements alongside his regular work and parenting duties. Amidst all this positive momentum, life at school was slowly returning to normal. The petition for enhanced safety measures had been successful, with the school board unanimously approving the proposed changes. New cameras had been installed on all buses, and the first round of comprehensive safety training for staff was underway. One morning, as Mike dropped Jasmine off at the bus stop, he noticed a new face behind the wheel. The new driver, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, waved as the children boarded. "Have a good day, sweetheart," Mike called as Jasmine climbed the steps. "Remember, I'm picking you up after your student council meeting this afternoon." As Mike watched the bus pull away, he felt a mix of emotions: pride in how far they'd come, relief at the new safety measures in place, but also a lingering unease. He knew that vigilance was key to maintaining this new sense of security. Later that afternoon, as Mike waited outside the school, he saw Jasmine emerge from the building, deep in conversation with a group of her friends. As they approached, he could hear snippets of their discussion. "I don't know, guys," Jasmine was saying, her brow furrowed. "Something about Mr. Evans just doesn't feel right." Mike's ears perked up at this. Mr. Evans was the name of the new bus driver. "Everything okay, Jasmine?" he asked as she reached the car. Jasmine hesitated, glancing at her friends before responding. "I'm not sure, Dad. Mr. Evans, the new driver, he's been asking a lot of questions about our schedules and where we live, and today he offered to give Jenny a ride home when her mum was late picking her up." Mike felt a chill run down his spine. After everything they'd been through, after all the measures they'd put in place, could they be facing another potential threat? "You did the right thing by noticing this and telling me, Jasmine," Mike said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Let's go home and talk about it more, okay?" As they drove home, Jasmine shared more details about Mr. Evans's behavior. None of it was overtly inappropriate, but the pattern was concerning. Mike's mind raced, torn between not wanting to jump to conclusions and the need to take any potential threat seriously. At home, Mike called Lisa Chen, who had become a close ally through their work on the safety committee. "Lisa, we might have a situation with the new bus driver," he began, outlining what Jasmine had told him. Lisa listened intently, then sighed. "I hate to say this, Mike, but I'm not entirely surprised. Remember that information I wanted to show you about the bus company's hiring practices? Well, I've discovered some discrepancies in their background check procedures. It's possible that Mr. Evans wasn't vetted as thoroughly as he should have been. Mike felt a surge of frustration and worry. So what do? We can't just accuse him without proof, but we can't ignore this either. No, we can't, Lisa agreed. But we've got protocols in place now, thanks to you and Jasmine. Let's start by reporting this to the school and the safety committee. We'll request a thorough background check on Mr. Evans and increased monitoring of his interactions with students. As Mike hung up the phone, he found Jasmine standing in the doorway, a worried expression on her face. Dad, are we going to have to go through all of this again? Mike knelt down, placing his hands on Jasmine's shoulders. I don't know, sweetheart. But what I do know is that because of you, because of what you've taught everyone about speaking up, we're in a much better position to handle this. You've made a real difference, Jasmine. Jasmine nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. So what do we do now? Mike stood up, a determined look in his eyes. Now we use the systems we've put in place. We report our concerns, we stay vigilant, and we keep encouraging everyone to speak up if something doesn't feel right. We've come too far to let our guard down now. As they settled in to draft an email to the school and safety committee, Mike couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Pride in Jasmine's continued bravery and awareness, frustration that they might be facing another challenge so soon, but most of all, determination. They had fought hard to create a safer environment for all children, and they wouldn't stop now. Whatever challenges lay ahead with Mr. Evans, Mike knew they were better prepared to face them. The community was more aware, the children more empowered to speak up, and the systems they'd put in place were ready to be tested. It wasn't the end of their journey, but rather the next chapter in their ongoing fight for children's safety. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Mike. After sending the initial email to the school and safety committee about Mr. Evans, he found himself thrust into the role of investigator once again. This time, however, he was determined to approach the situation with caution and thoroughness. Early one morning, Mike met with Lisa Chen at a local coffee shop, away from prying eyes and ears. Lisa had brought a thick folder filled with documents, her face grave as she spread them out on the table. Mike, what I've found about the bus company's hiring practices is concerning, to say the least, Lisa began, her voice low. There are significant gaps in their background check procedures. In some cases, they've failed to verify previous employment or check references thoroughly. Mike leaned in, scanning the documents. And Mr. Evans, what do we know about him? Lisa sighed, pushing a particular file towards Mike. That's where it gets tricky. On paper, Mr. Evans looks clean. No criminal record, good references, but... She paused, tapping a section of the document. There are inconsistencies in his employment history. Gaps that aren't explained. Jobs that don't quite add up. Mike felt a knot forming in his stomach. So we don't have anything concrete, but there are red flags. Exactly, Lisa nodded. And given what Jasmine and the other kids have reported about his behavior, I think we need to dig deeper. Over the next few days, Mike found himself balancing his regular work with discreet inquiries about Mr. Evans. He reached out to contacts in other school districts, cross-referencing Mr. Evans' employment history. He even hired a private investigator using funds from a community safety fund that had been set up after the Robert Johnson incident. As Mike delved deeper into the investigation, he was careful to keep Jasmine informed without burdening her with too many details. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Jasmine working on homework and Mike poring over documents, she looked up with a worried expression. Dad? Is Mr. Evans, is he like Mr. Johnson? Mike paused, considering his words carefully. We don't know for sure, sweetheart. That's why we're looking into it. But I want you to know that you did the right thing by speaking up about what made you uncomfortable. That's exactly what we've been teaching everyone to do. Jasmine nodded, then asked hesitantly, Are the other kids mad at me for causing more trouble? Mike's heart ached at the question. He reached across the table, taking Jasmine's hand. Absolutely not. In fact, several other students have come forward with similar concerns. You've inspired them to speak up too. Remember, you're not causing trouble. You're helping keep everyone safe. As the investigation progressed, word began to spread through the community. Parents started approaching Mike in the grocery store, at school events, even at Jasmine's soccer practice, all eager for information and reassurance. One Saturday morning, as Mike was mowing the lawn, his neighbor Tom walked over, a concerned look on his face. "Mike, got a minute?" Mike switched off the mower, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sure, Tom. What's up?" Tom glanced around before speaking, his voice low. "I've been hearing things about the new bus driver. My Sarah's been saying he asks a lot of personal questions. Is it true you're looking into him?" Mike nodded, choosing his words carefully. "We're investigating some concerns that have been raised. Nothing's been proven yet, but we're taking it seriously." Tom's brow furrowed. "But I thought we'd fixed all this with the new safety measures. How could this be happening again?" Mike sighed, understanding Tom's frustration all too well. "The truth is, Tom, it's an ongoing process. We've made a lot of progress, but we can't let our guard down. That's why it's so important that kids like Sarah feel comfortable speaking up about things that make them uncomfortable." As Tom walked away, looking troubled, Mike realized that this conversation was likely playing out all over town. The community was on edge, torn between the desire to feel that their children were finally safe and the creeping fear that they might be facing another predator. The next day, Mike received a call from Principal Hernandez. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice tense, "I think we need to address the community directly about the situation with Mr. Evans. The rumors are getting out of hand and parents are demanding answers." Mike agreed, and together they planned an emergency community meeting for the following evening. As he hung up the phone, Mike felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. They had to strike a delicate balance, addressing the community's concerns without causing panic or compromising the ongoing investigation. That night, as Mike was preparing notes for the meeting, Jasmine appeared in the doorway of his home office. "Dad, can I come to the meeting tomorrow?" Mike looked up, surprised. "Are you sure you want to, sweetheart? It might get pretty intense." Jasmine nodded, a determined look in her eyes. "I think I should be there. I started this and, well, I think it might help if people see me, to remind them why we're doing all this." Mike felt a surge of pride at his daughter's courage and maturity. "Okay, Jasmine, if you're sure you can come, but promise me you'll let me know if it gets too overwhelming." The next evening, the school gymnasium was packed once again. The tension in the air was palpable as Mike took the stage alongside Principal Hernandez and Lisa Chen. Jasmine sat in the front row, offering a reassuring smile as Mike stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," Mike began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I know many of you have questions and concerns about the rumors circulating regarding our new bus driver, Mr. Evans. I want to assure you that we are taking these concerns very seriously." He went on to outline the steps being taken: the increased monitoring, the ongoing investigation, the review of hiring practices. As he spoke, he could see the mixture of emotions on the faces in the crowd: fear, anger, frustration, but also determination and hope. "I know this is difficult," Mike continued. "We all want to believe that after everything we've been through, our children are finally safe. But the reality is, keeping our kids safe is an ongoing process. It requires constant vigilance, open communication, and a willingness to speak up when something doesn't feel right." As questions from the audience began, ranging from worried to confrontational, Mike found himself drawing strength from Jasmine's presence. Her bravery in coming forward, in continuing to speak out, was a powerful reminder of why this fight was so important. Towards the end of the meeting, a visibly upset mother stood up. "How can we trust anything anymore? How do we know our kids are safe on that bus?" Before Mike could respond, Jasmine stood up, turning to face the crowd. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "I know it's scary," Jasmine said, her voice small but clear. "I was scared too when I first spoke up about Mr. Johnson. But that's why it's so important that we keep talking about this stuff, that we keep looking out for each other. Because when we do that, when we're not afraid to say something feels wrong, that's how we keep each other safe." As Jasmine sat down to a round of applause, Mike felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, they were facing another challenge. Yes, the road ahead might be difficult, but together, as a community united in their commitment to protecting their children, they would face whatever came next. The meeting concluded with a renewed commitment to transparency and communication. As people filed out of the gymnasium, many stopped to thank Mike and Jasmine for their continued efforts. Walking to the car, Mike put his arm around Jasmine's shoulders. "You were amazing in there, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Jasmine looked up at him, a mix of determination and weariness in her eyes. "Tired, but good, I think. Like we're doing the right thing." Mike nodded, giving her a squeeze. "We are, Jasmine. It's not always easy, but it's important, and we're in this together." As they drove home, Mike's mind was already racing with next steps. The investigation into Mr. Evans needed to be accelerated, the bus company's hiring practices thoroughly audited. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of pride. In his daughter, in their community, and in the knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on, united in their commitment to keeping their children safe. The investigation into Mr. Evans intensified over the next few weeks. Mike, working closely with Lisa Chen and the safety committee, had been meticulously gathering information. They had uncovered discrepancies in Mr. Evans' employment history and received concerning reports from students about his behavior. However, they still lacked concrete evidence of any wrongdoing. As the pressure mounted, Mike decided it was time to present their findings to the school board and push for Mr. Evans' suspension pending a full investigation. He scheduled a meeting with Principal Hernandez to discuss their next steps. On the day of the meeting, Mike arrived at the school early, his briefcase filled with documents and his mind racing with how to present their case. As he walked towards the principal's office, he overheard raised voices coming from inside. Pausing outside the door, he recognized Principal Hernandez's voice, sounding uncharacteristically agitated. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Evans, but I can assure you that the investigation is being conducted fairly," Principal Hernandez was saying. Mike's heart raced as he heard Mr. Evans reply, his voice low and threatening. "Fair? There's nothing fair about this witch hunt. I've done nothing wrong, and I won't stand for these baseless accusations." Taking a deep breath, Mike knocked on the door, effectively ending the heated conversation inside. Principal Hernandez called for him to enter, her face flushed and flustered. Mr. Evans turned as Mike walked in, his eyes narrowing. "Well, if it isn't the ringleader himself," he sneered. "Come to spread more lies about me?" Mike stood his ground, meeting Mr. Evans' gaze steadily. "Mr. Evans, I assure you we're not spreading lies. We're investigating legitimate concerns raised by students and parents." Principal Hernandez intervened, her voice strained as she tried to maintain calm. "Gentlemen, please. Mr. Evans was just leaving. We can discuss this further at a more appropriate time." As Mr. Evans stormed out of the office, Mike couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in his stomach. The man's reaction only seemed to confirm their suspicions. Once they were alone, Principal Hernandez sank into her chair with a heavy sigh. "I apologize you had to witness that, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Evans came in unannounced, demanding to know why he was being investigated." Mike nodded, setting his briefcase on the desk. "I understand. It's a tense situation for everyone. But I think what just happened only underscores the importance of what we need to discuss today." Over the next hour, Mike presented the evidence they had gathered. Employment gaps that couldn't be explained, references that couldn't be verified, and a pattern of behavior reported by students that, while not overtly criminal, raised serious red flags. Principal Hernandez listened intently, her frown deepening as Mike laid out their case. When he finished, she remained silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled under her chin. "Mr. Thompson," she finally said, "I appreciate the thoroughness of your investigation. However, I'm afraid we still don't have enough concrete evidence to justify suspending Mr. Evans. We could be opening ourselves up to a lawsuit if we act without proof." Mike felt a surge of frustration. "Mrs. Hernandez, with all due respect, we can't afford to wait for something to happen before we act. The safety of our children has to come first." The principal nodded, her expression torn. "I agree that the children's safety is paramount, but we also have to consider due process. Let me take this to the school board. We'll call an emergency meeting for tomorrow evening. Can you present your findings there?" Mike agreed, though he left the office feeling unsettled. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The next evening, the school board convened in the conference room. Mike, along with Lisa Chen, presented their evidence to the somber-faced board members. As they spoke, Mike could see the concern growing on the faces before him. However, just as they were wrapping up their presentation, the door burst open. Mr. Evans strode in, his face red with anger. "I demand to be heard," he shouted. "These people are trying to ruin my life with their baseless accusations." The room erupted into chaos. Board members started talking over each other, some calling for order, others demanding Mr. Evans leave immediately. In the commotion, Mike noticed something fall from Mr. Evans' pocket, a small notebook. Acting on instinct, Mike quickly bent down and picked up the notebook, slipping it into his jacket pocket before anyone else noticed. As security arrived to escort the agitated Mr. Evans out, Mike's mind raced. What was in that notebook? Could it provide the evidence they so desperately needed? Once order was restored, the board chair, looking shaken, addressed the room. "In light of this incident, and the evidence presented by Mr. Thompson and Ms. Chen, I move that we suspend Mr. Evans pending a full investigation by the authorities. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned, Mike felt a mix of relief and apprehension. They had achieved their immediate goal, but he knew the real work was just beginning. Outside the conference room, Lisa approached Mike, her face etched with concern. "That was intense. Are you okay?" Mike nodded, then lowered his voice. "Lisa, I need to show you something, but not here. Can you come by my house in an hour?" An hour later, Mike and Lisa sat at his kitchen table, the mysterious notebook between them. With trembling hands, Mike opened it. What they found inside made their blood run cold. The notebook contained detailed information about several students, their routines, their family situations, even notes about which children seemed vulnerable or isolated. It was the kind of information a predator might collect, planning their next move. Lisa's face had gone pale. "Mike, this is exactly what we needed. But it's also terrifying. We need to get this to the police immediately." Mike nodded, already reaching for his phone. As he dialed, he saw Jasmine watching from the doorway, her eyes wide with concern. He gave her a reassuring nod, mouthing, "It's okay," as the phone began to ring. The next few hours were a blur of police interviews and urgent phone calls. The notebook was taken as evidence, and a full-scale investigation into Mr. Evans was launched. As the night wore on, Mike found himself sitting on the couch, emotionally and physically exhausted. Jasmine curled up next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Dad, is it over now? Did we stop the bad guy?" Mike wrapped an arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "I think we did, sweetheart. Thanks to you and everyone else who was brave enough to speak up, we were able to stop Mr. Evans before he could hurt anyone." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think there are more bad people out there? Like Mr. Johnson and Mr. Evans?" Mike sighed, considering his words carefully. "There might be, Jasmine, but that's why what we've done is so important. We've shown that our community won't stay silent. We'll keep watching out for each other, keep speaking up when something doesn't feel right." As Jasmine drifted off to sleep, Mike's mind was already turning to the future. They had won a significant battle, but the war to keep children safe was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, ensuring a thorough investigation, supporting any potential victims, and continuing to strengthen their community's safety measures. But for now, as he looked at his sleeping daughter, Mike allowed himself to feel a moment of true accomplishment. They had faced a threat and overcome it, not through violence or vengeance, but through vigilance, community action, and the courage to speak up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Mike Thompson could rest easy knowing that thanks to their efforts, the children of their community were a little bit safer. The news of Mr. Evans's suspension and the subsequent police investigation spread through the community like wildfire. Within hours of the school board meeting, local news outlets picked up the story, and by the next morning it had become the talk of the town. Mike woke up to find his phone inundated with messages and missed calls. As he scrolled through them, still groggy from the late night, he realized the magnitude of what had happened was just beginning to unfold. Downstairs, he found Jasmine already awake, watching the local news on TV. A reporter stood outside the school, recapping the events of the previous night. Sources say that evidence was uncovered implicating the suspended bus driver in potentially predatory behavior. The school board acted swiftly to remove him from his position, pending a full police investigation. This comes just months after another incident involving a different bus driver at the same school. Mike quickly turned off the TV, not wanting Jasmine to be overwhelmed by the coverage. "How about some breakfast, sweetheart?" he asked, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. As they ate, Mike's phone rang. It was Lisa Chen. "Mike, have you seen the news? It's everywhere. We're getting calls from parents, teachers, even media outlets from the next state over." Mike sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I've seen it. What do you think our next move should be?" Lisa paused before responding. "I think we need to get ahead of this. The school's going to be issuing a statement, but people trust you, Mike. They'll want to hear from you directly." After some discussion, they decided to hold a press conference later that day. Mike spent the morning coordinating with the school, the police department, and the safety committee to ensure they presented a united front. As the hours ticked by, Mike couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Pride in what they had accomplished, relief that they had potentially stopped a predator, but also a gnawing worry about the impact all this attention might have on Jasmine and the other children involved. Just before they left for the press conference, Jasmine tugged on Mike's sleeve. "Dad, can I come with you? I want to help." Mike knelt down to her level, searching her face. "Are you sure, sweetheart? There's going to be a lot of people and cameras. It might be overwhelming." Jasmine nodded, her expression determined. "I'm sure. I think it's important for people to see that kids can make a difference too." Feeling a surge of pride, Mike agreed. Together they headed to the school, where a crowd of reporters and community members had already gathered. As they approached the makeshift podium set up on the school steps, Mike felt Jasmine's hand tighten in his. He gave it a reassuring squeeze before stepping up to the microphone. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "As many of you know, last night our school board made the decision to suspend a bus driver due to serious concerns about his behavior towards students. This decision was not made lightly, but came after weeks of investigation and reports from concerned students and parents." Mike went on to outline the events that had led to this point, careful not to reveal any details that might compromise the ongoing police investigation. He emphasized the importance of the new safety measures they had put in place and the critical role that open communication between students, parents, and school officials had played. "What happened here is not just about one individual," Mike continued. "It's about a community coming together to protect its most vulnerable members. It's about creating an environment where children feel safe to speak up when something doesn't feel right." As he spoke, Mike could see the impact his words were having. Parents in the crowd nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. "But I'm not the real hero of this story," Mike said, his voice softening. "The real heroes are the children who had the courage to speak up, to tell us adults when something wasn't right. Children like my daughter, Jasmine." With that, Mike stepped back, gently guiding Jasmine to the microphone. There was a moment of hushed silence as the young girl looked out at the sea of faces before her. "Hi," Jasmine began, her voice small but clear. "I'm Jasmine. A few months ago, I told my dad about a bus driver who was making me uncomfortable. It was really scary, but I knew it was the right thing to do." As Jasmine continued, sharing her experience and encouraging other kids to speak up if they ever felt unsafe, Mike watched the crowd's reaction. He saw tears in the eyes of hardened reporters, saw parents pulling their own children close. "We kids might be small," Jasmine concluded, "but our voices are strong. And when we use them to help each other, we can make a big difference." The press conference ended with a round of applause that seemed to shake the very ground. As Mike and Jasmine made their way back through the crowd, they were stopped repeatedly by people wanting to shake their hands, to thank them, to share their own stories. Over the next few days, the story gained national attention. Mike found himself fielding calls from major news networks, all wanting interviews or comments. Jasmine's speech went viral on social media, with people praising her bravery and using her words to start conversations about child safety in their own communities. But with the increased attention came new challenges. Some parents, frightened by the revelation that another potential predator had slipped through the cracks, began calling for extreme measures: constant video surveillance, background checks for anyone who came into contact with children, even shutting down the bus system entirely. Mike and the safety committee found themselves working around the clock to address concerns, to provide accurate information, and to prevent panic from overtaking reason. One evening, as Mike sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers and his ever-ringing phone, Jasmine came and sat beside him. "Dad?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Did we do the right thing? Some kids at school said their parents are really scared now. They said it's our fault for making such a big deal about everything." Mike put down his phone, giving Jasmine his full attention. "Sweetheart, we absolutely did the right thing. Yes, some people are scared right now, but that's not because of what we did. It's because they're realizing how important it is to stay vigilant, to keep our children safe." He pulled her into a hug. "What we did, what you did, was incredibly brave. We helped stop someone who might have hurt a lot of kids. And now, because of you, more people are talking about how to keep children safe. That's a good thing, even if it's a little scary sometimes." Jasmine nodded, seeming to understand. As she headed off to bed, Mike turned back to his work with renewed determination. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges to face, more systems to improve, more conversations to have. But as he looked at a framed photo on his desk, a picture of Jasmine smiling broadly after her speech, he knew it was all worth it. They had started something important, something that was already spreading beyond their small community. It wasn't just about catching bad guys anymore. It was about creating a culture where children felt empowered to speak up, where communities came together to protect their most vulnerable members. Whatever came next, Mike knew they would face it together, as a family, as a community, and as advocates for children everywhere. The journey was far from over, but with each step they were making the world a little bit safer for kids like Jasmine. A month had passed since the press conference that thrust Mike and Jasmine into the national spotlight. The initial frenzy of media attention had died down, but the impact of their story continued to ripple through the community and beyond. The school had implemented a series of new safety measures, including enhanced background checks for all staff, mandatory safety training sessions, and a new anonymous reporting system for students. The bus company had overhauled its hiring practices and installed cameras on all vehicles. On the surface, it seemed that significant progress had been made. Mike sat at his desk reviewing the latest report from the safety committee. The statistics were encouraging. More students were coming forward to report concerns, no matter how small. The new policies were being followed diligently. Yet despite these positive changes, Mike couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Chen. "Turn on the news, Channel 5. Frowning, Mike switched on the small TV in his office. The lead story made his heart sink. Breaking news. Former bus driver Robert Johnson, previously arrested for inappropriate behavior towards students, has been released on bail pending his trial. Johnson's lawyer claims that new evidence has come to light that could exonerate his client. Mike's mind raced. How was this possible? They had thought this chapter was closed, that Johnson was no longer a threat. Now it seemed they were facing a new battle. As if on cue, his phone began to ring. Parents, fellow committee members, all wanting to know what this meant, what they should do. Mike did his best to calm their fears, assuring them that the safety measures they had put in place were still effective, that they would face this new challenge head-on. That evening, as Mike prepared dinner, he struggled with how to break the news to Jasmine. She had been doing so well, had grown so much through this experience. He hated the thought of disrupting her newfound sense of security. "Dad?" Jasmine's voice broke into his thoughts. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, her expression worried. "Is everything okay? You look upset." Mike took a deep breath, gesturing for Jasmine to sit at the kitchen table. "Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Mr. Johnson." As gently as he could, Mike explained the situation. He watched as a range of emotions played across Jasmine's face: fear, anger, confusion. But how?" Jasmine finally asked, her voice small. "We did everything right. We told the truth. How can he be out?" Mike reached across the table, taking Jasmine's hand. "Sometimes, sweetheart, the legal system is complicated. But I want you to know that this doesn't change anything about what you did. You were brave, you told the truth, and you helped protect a lot of people. We're going to keep fighting to make sure everyone stays safe." Jasmine nodded, but Mike could see the worry in her eyes. What if he tries to hurt someone again?" "We won't let that happen," Mike said firmly. "We're going to work with the police, with the school, with everyone in the community to make sure he can't hurt anyone. And remember, because of you, everyone is more aware now. We're all watching out for each other." As they finished dinner, Mike's phone rang again. It was Detective Martinez, who had been in charge of the Johnson case. "Mr. Thompson," the detective's voice was grave, "I wanted to give you a heads up. We've received reports that Johnson has been seen in the neighborhood. He hasn't violated any terms of his release, but I thought you should know." Mike felt a chill run down his spine. "Thank you, Detective. What can we do?" "For now, just stay vigilant. Report any suspicious activity. And, Mr. Thompson, you might want to consider extra precautions for Jasmine. Johnson hasn't made any threats, but given her role in his arrest." After hanging up, Mike sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of this new threat settling heavily on his shoulders. He had known their fight wasn't over, but he hadn't expected this. The thought of Johnson, free and potentially seeking revenge, made his blood run cold. Over the next few days, Mike worked tirelessly with the safety committee and local law enforcement to develop a response plan. They organized neighborhood watch groups, set up a community alert system, and held emergency meetings to inform parents and children about the situation. Through it all, Mike kept a close eye on Jasmine. She put on a brave face, but he could see the toll it was taking on her. She was jumpier, more hesitant to go out alone. One night, he found her sitting up in bed, unable to sleep. "Dad?" she asked as he sat on the edge of her bed. "Are we ever going to feel really safe again?" Mike's heart ached at the question. He wished he could promise her that everything would be okay, that they would never have to worry again. But he knew that wasn't the truth, and he had always been honest with Jasmine. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said softly. "But here's what I do know. We're stronger now. We're more aware, and we have a whole community of people looking out for each other. That doesn't mean nothing bad will ever happen, but it does mean we're better prepared to handle whatever comes our way." Jasmine nodded, seeming to take comfort in his words. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm also, I don't know, determined? I don't want to let Mr. Johnson make me feel weak." Pride swelled in Mike's chest. "That's my girl, And you're not alone. We're in this together, remember?" As he tucked Jasmine in, Mike's mind was already racing with plans. They needed to do more than just react to threats. They needed to be proactive, to create lasting change that would protect children long after this immediate crisis had passed. The next morning, Mike called an emergency meeting of the safety committee. As they gathered in the school library, he could see the determination in each face. "We've made great progress," Mike began, "but recent events have shown us that our work is far from over. We need to think bigger. We need to create a model that other communities can follow, a comprehensive approach to child safety that goes beyond just catching bad guys." Over the next few hours, they brainstormed ideas, expanded education programs for children and parents, partnerships with child psychology experts to better understand and address the root causes of predatory behavior, lobbying for stricter laws and harsher penalties for crimes against children. As the meeting wound down, Lisa Chen spoke up. "Mike, I think we need to take this beyond just our community. What we're doing here, what Jasmine started, it could help kids everywhere. Have you considered reaching out to national child safety organizations?" Mike nodded, the seeds of a larger plan taking root in his mind. "I think you're right, Lisa. This is bigger than just us now. We have a responsibility to share what we've learned, to help other communities protect their children." As he left the meeting, Mike felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging. They were no longer just fighting against individual predators, but against a system that too often failed to protect its most vulnerable members. But as he thought of Jasmine, of her bravery and resilience, he knew they were on the right path. They had started this journey to protect one child, and now they had the opportunity to protect countless others. The threat posed by Robert Johnson's release was real and immediate, but it had also galvanized their community, pushing them to think bigger, to reach further. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Mike was confident that they would face them together, united in their commitment to creating a safer world for all children. The tension in the community had been building for weeks since Robert Johnson's release. Despite the increased vigilance and safety measures, there was an undercurrent of fear that permeated everyday life. Parents were more protective, children more cautious, and the whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. For Mike, the stress was taking its toll. He found himself constantly checking on Jasmine, jumping at unexpected noises and struggling to sleep at night. The responsibility he felt for not just his daughter's safety, but for the entire community's well-being, weighed heavily on him. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when everything came to a head. Mike was driving home from a late meeting with the safety committee, the windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. As he turned onto his street, a figure caught his eye, a man standing at the corner watching Mike's house intently. Mike's heart raced as he recognized the silhouette. Robert Johnson. Without thinking, Mike pulled over and got out of the car, rain immediately soaking through his clothes. "Johnson!" he called out, his voice barely audible over the storm. "What are you doing here?" Johnson turned, surprise flashing across his face before it settled into a sneer. "Well, if it isn't the town hero," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Come to save the day again." Mike approached cautiously, his mind racing. He knew he should call the police, but he was afraid Johnson might disappear if he took his eyes off him. "You need to leave," Mike said firmly. "You have no business being here." Johnson took a step closer, his eyes glinting dangerously in the dim streetlight. "No business? This was my life, Thompson, my job, my community, and you and that brat of yours took it all away from me." Mike's fists clenched at his sides, anger surging through him at the threat to Jasmine. "You did this to yourself, Johnson. You betrayed the trust of innocent children. You're lucky you're not in jail right now." "Lucky?" Johnson laughed bitterly. "I've lost everything, my reputation, my freedom, and for what? A few misunderstood comments? You people are so quick to assume the worst." As Johnson spoke, Mike noticed something that made his blood run cold. In Johnson's hand, partially concealed by his rain jacket, was what looked like a small notebook. The similarity to the one they had found in Mr. Evans' possession was unmistakable. Realization dawned on Mike. "It wasn't just comments, was it?" he said, his voice low. "You and Evans, you were working together, planning." Johnson's face contorted with rage. "You don't know anything," he spat. "You and your do-gooder friends, always thinking you know best. Well, I'm done hiding. I'm done being persecuted for things I haven't even done yet." With that, Johnson lunged forward, catching Mike off guard. They grappled in the rain, Mike desperately trying to get hold of the notebook while also defending himself from Johnson's wild swings. In the distance, Mike heard a door open. "Dad?" Jasmine's voice called out, filled with fear. "Jasmine, stay inside!" Mike yelled, momentarily distracted. Johnson used that moment to break free, turning to run. Without thinking, Mike tackled him, both men crashing to the wet pavement. The notebook went flying, landing open on the sidewalk. As they struggled, Mike caught glimpses of its contents: names, addresses, schedules, the evidence they needed to put Johnson away for good. Suddenly, flashing lights illuminated the scene. Police cars screeched to a halt, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. "Freeze! Police!" a voice commanded. Mike rolled off Johnson, hands raised. "The notebook!" he gasped, pointing. "Get the notebook!" As the officers handcuffed a defeated-looking Johnson, Detective Martinez approached Mike. "We got an anonymous tip that Johnson was in the area," she explained. "Looks like we got here just in time." Mike nodded, still catching his breath. "The notebook," he said urgently. "It's got evidence. Him and Evans, they were working together." Detective Martinez's eyes widened as she flipped through the soggy pages. "This is... Mr. Thompson, this is exactly what we needed. With this, we can put both of them away for a long time." As the adrenaline began to fade, Mike suddenly remembered Jasmine. He turned to see her standing on the porch, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Ignoring the rain and his own exhaustion, he ran to her, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured. "It's over. It's really over this time." Over the next few hours, their house became a flurry of activity. Police officers took statements, neighbors gathered to offer support, and news vans began to appear as word spread of Johnson's arrest. By morning, the story was everywhere. The notebook had contained not just plans, but detailed accounts of past misdeeds, implicating both Johnson and Evans in a pattern of behavior that spanned years and multiple school districts. The community's response was overwhelming. People came together, not in fear this time, but in celebration and solidarity. A spontaneous gathering formed in the town square, with parents, teachers, and children all united in their relief and determination to move forward. At the impromptu podium, Mike stood with Jasmine by his side, looking out at the sea of faces, faces that had become so familiar over the past months of struggle and activism. "Today," Mike began, his voice carrying across the square, "we've seen the power of a community united. What started as one child's bravery," he smiled down at Jasmine, "grew into a movement that has made our town, and hopefully many others, safer for all children." He went on to outline their plans moving forward, the educational programs they'd developed, the partnerships they'd formed with national organizations, the changes in legislation they were pushing for. "But more than any policy or program," Mike continued, "what will keep our children safe is this: our commitment to each other, our willingness to speak up, to take action, to believe our children when they tell us something's wrong." As Mike spoke, he could see the impact of his words. People were nodding, some wiping away tears, others holding their children close. This wasn't just about catching two predators. It was about a fundamental shift in how their community approached the safety and well-being of its most vulnerable members. Jasmine tugged at Mike's sleeve, gesturing that she wanted to say something. Mike stepped back, allowing her to take the microphone. "Hi, everyone," Jasmine began, her voice small but steady. "I just wanted to say thank you. When I first spoke up, I was really scared. I didn't know if anyone would believe me or if it would make any difference. But you all listened. You all helped. And now, because we all worked together, kids like me can feel safer." She paused, looking out at the crowd with a maturity beyond her years. "So if you're a kid and something doesn't feel right, remember, your voice matters. And there are grown-ups who will listen and help. And if you're a grown-up, please always listen to kids when they tell you something's wrong, because together, we can make things better." The applause that followed was deafening. As Mike hugged Jasmine close, he felt a profound sense of pride, not just in his daughter, but in their entire community. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials to face, systems to change, and ongoing vigilance to maintain. But looking out at the united faces before him, Mike knew that they were up to the challenge. What had started as one father's quest to protect his daughter had become a movement, a beacon of hope for communities everywhere. They had faced darkness and emerged stronger, more united and more determined than ever to create a world where all children could feel safe and heard. As the gathering began to disperse, people stopping to shake hands, hug and make plans, Mike knew that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, the start of a new chapter for their community and for the countless others they would inspire and help in the years to come. With Jasmine's hand in his, Mike stepped off the podium, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that they would face them together, as a family, as a community, and as advocates for children everywhere. "A lot of you know me as the girl who reported Mr. Johnson." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "It wasn't easy to speak up. I was scared. But I knew what Mr. Johnson was doing wasn't right, and I didn't want anyone else to feel the way I did." As Jasmine continued, sharing her experience and the importance of speaking up, Mike noticed the rapt attention of the audience. Parents leaned forward in their seats, some wiping away tears,